political system increasingly functions without public input. It means to an increasing extent not only do people not ratify decisions presented to them, but they don't even participate, they don't even take the trouble of ratifying them. They assume that the decisions are going on independently of what they may do in the polling booth.
And they feel...
Notice that even ratification of decisions made elsewhere is a very weak form of democracy.
Ratification would be what?
Well, ratification would mean a system in which there are two positions presented to me, the voter. I go into the polling booth and I push one or another button depending on which of those positions I want. That's a very limited form of democracy. A really meaningful democracy would mean that I play a role in forming those decisions, in creating those positions, that those positions reflect my active, creative participation at not just me, but of course everyone. That would be real democracy.
That's not
We're
happening.
very far from that.
Yeah.
In a capitalist democracy, you have the problem, and it is always perceived as a problem, that the general population has a method of participating in decision-making. They can participate in politics. The state is not capable of stopping them. You can't shut them up, you can't put them in jail, you can't keep them away from the polls, and so on. And it's striking that that has always been perceived as a problem to be overcome. It's what's called the crisis of democracy. Too many people organizing themselves to enter the public arena. That's a crisis. So therefore, we have to have what Walter Lippmann, back in 1920 or so, called manufacture of consent. We have to ensure that actual decision-making, actual power is in the hands of what he called a specialized class, us smart guys, who are going to make the right decisions. And we've got to keep the general population marginalized because they're always going to make mistakes.
Marginalizing meaning?
Reduce them to apathy and obedience. Allow them to participate in the political system, but as consumers, not as true participants. That is, allow them a method for ratifying decisions that are made by others, but eliminate the methods by which they might first inform themselves, second organize, and third act in such a way as to really control decision-making. That is, the idea is our leaders control us, not we control them. The doctrines of the Enlightenment held that individuals should be free from the coercion of concentrated power. Now, the kind of concentrated power that they were thinking about was the church and the state and the feudal system and so on. And you could sort of imagine a population of relatively equal people, at least equal white male property owners, who would be not controlled by those private powers. But in the subsequent period, a new form of power developed, namely corporations, with highly concentrated power over decision-making in economic life. That is, they control over what's produced, what's distributed, what's invested, and so on and so forth, is very narrowly concentrated.
So this is why the vice president of a large corporation would say the public mind is the chief thing.
The public mind might have funny ideas about democracy, which say that we should not be forced simply to rent ourselves to the people who own the country, and own its institutions. Rather, we should play a role in determining what those institutions do. That's democracy. If we were to move towards democracy, and I think democracy even in the 18th century sense, we would say that there should be no maldistribution of power in determining what's produced, what's distributed, what's invested, and so on. Rather, that should be, that's a problem for the entire community. In fact, there are, in my own personal view, unless we move in that direction, human society probably isn't going to survive.
Why?
Well, we now face the most awesome problems of human history, problems such as the likelihood of nuclear conflict, either among the superpowers or through proliferation, the destruction of a fragile environment, which finally we're beginning to recognize that was obvious decades ago that we're heading for disaster. Other problems of this nature, they're of a level of seriousness that they never were in the past.
But why do you think more participation by the public, more democracy is the answer?
Because, well, more democracy is a value in itself. So quite apart from, because democracy is a value, it doesn't have to be defended any more than freedom has to be defended. That's just, it's an essential feature of human nature that people should be free, they should be able to participate, they should be uncoerced, and so on. These are values in themselves.
Right. Why do you think, if we go that route,
because I think that that's the only hope that I can see, that other values will come to the fore. I mean, if the society is based on control by private wealth, it will reflect the values that it in fact does reflect. The value that the highest, the only real human property is the desire is greed and the desire to maximize personal gain at the expense of others. Now, any society, maybe a small society based on that principle is ugly, but it can survive. A global society based on that principle is headed for massive destruction, and that's what we are. We have to have a mode of social organization that reflects other values that I think are inherent in human nature that people recognize.
And that would be, I want to see exactly what you mean.
I mean, what are human beings? I mean, in your family, for example, it's not the case that in the family every person tries to maximize personal gain at the expense of others, or if they do, it's kind of pathological. It's not the case that if you and I are, say, walking down the street and we see a child eating a piece of candy and we see that nobody's around, and we happen to be hungry, we don't steal it. If we did that, we would be pathological. I mean, the idea of care for others and concern for other people's needs and concern for a fragile environment that must sustain future generations, all of these things are part of human nature. These are elements of human nature that are suppressed in a social and cultural system which is designed to maximize personal gain. And I think we must try to overcome that suppression, and that's in fact what democracy could bring about. It could lead to the expression of other human needs and values which tend to be suppressed under the institutional structure of a system of private power and private profit. If a real democracy is going to thrive, if the real values that are deeply embedded in human nature are going to be able to flourish, and I think that's necessary to save us, if nothing else, it's an absolute necessity that groups form in which people can join together, can share their concerns, can articulate their ideas, can gain a response, can discover what they think, can discover what they believe, what their values are. This can't be imposed on you from above. You have to discover it by experiment, by effort, by trial, by application, and so on. And this has to be done with others. Furthermore, surely central to human nature is a need to be engaged with others in cooperative efforts of solidarity and concern. That can only happen, almost by definition, through group structures. And unless such
political organization,
political and others,
civic organizations,
all sorts,
trade associations.
Yeah, I mean, there are all kinds of ways in which people can associate with one another. And I think what I would like to see is a move towards a society which is really based on proliferating voluntary organization, with eliminating as much as possible structures of hierarchy and domination and the basis for them in ownership and control, and becoming the means by which we govern ourselves, by which we control our lives.